Welcome to We the Waste People podcast, where we honor our Southern white trash roots while discussing left-wing politics and culture. So today it's going to be just me. John and I ran into some scheduling conflicts this week, and so hopefully he'll be back for the next one. But honestly, it might be for the best because this is one of those moments where I need to talk through what's been sitting heavy on my heart. Call it a vent, call it thinking out loud, but it feels necessary. But before I get started with my rant, let me state that what follows are my own thoughts and opinions. John may feel entirely different about what I'm going to discuss today, so I just want to throw out that disclaimer at the top. Let me start by saying this up front. I'm not a doomer. I actually believe that the true left has an enormous amount to offer our current political situation. The problem is that what passes for the left right now is either so thoroughly propagandized that it barely understands its own political lineage, or it's just liberalism wearing a radical costume. And liberalism, historically speaking, is not a left-wing position. It never has been. Marx said it plainly. Liberalism protects private property and capital first, and everything else is negotiable. Rosa Luxemburg went further and warned that liberal reforms without structural change don't stop exploitation. They stabilize it. And that's where we are now, a left that's been declawed, professionalized, and absorbed into the system it claims to oppose. On top of that, we are so deeply indoctrinated into capitalism and hyper-individualism that many of us literally cannot imagine collective resistance, let alone collective liberation. We live in our nuclear households, isolated in suburban cookie-cutter developments, lucky if we know the name of just one of our neighbors. We wake up, we go to work, grind it out for the bosses and managers, and if you're in the professional managerial class, or PMC for short, you're not exempt. You're just an overseer for the same system. Then we go home, distract ourselves with endless content, consume more bread and circus, and repeat the process tomorrow. This isn't an accident. Antonio Gramsci called this cultural hegemony, the ability of the ruling class to make their worldview feel natural, inevitable, and invisible. Atomization and convenience aren't side effects of capitalism, they are its greatest weapons. Now, I want to be very clear here. This is not to diminish the people who are putting their literal bodies on the line right now. What we're seeing in places like Minneapolis and Chicago takes courage, and those people are heroes. But history tells us something important. Spontaneous uprisings alone don't transform societies. Every major rupture, the Russian Revolution, the Spanish Civil War, decolonization movements, succeeded or failed based on what existed before the crisis. Organization, education, parallel structures, long-term vision. So I have to ask, beyond short-term pushback, what is the plan? Every period of upheaval is an opportunity, and right now it feels like a large portion of the left is just waiting for midterms, hoping things will go back to normal. Normal? Isn't normal what brought us here? Do we really believe a corrupt government run by a uniparty that serves capital is going to save us from fascism? Because history says otherwise. The Weimar liberals didn't stop Hitler. The Italian centrists didn't stop Mussolini. And American Democrats will not stop what's coming, because at the end of the day, they share material interests with the ruling class. Even Gavin Newsom, Mr. Resistance Theater himself, refuses to tax billionaires, and that's not a contradiction, that's a warning. Frederick Douglass said, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. Not a vote, not a tweet, a demand backed by organized force." Which brings me to what feels like the real question we're avoiding. Are we headed toward revolutionary change or reactionary change? Because right now, if we don't think outside the box, we are drifting toward reactionary collapse, likely violent, possibly Civil War level instability, and shaped entirely by the right. Revolutionary conditions don't automatically produce revolutionary outcomes. Lenin warned about this repeatedly. Without a revolutionary mindset, crisis just empowers the most organized reactionary forces. So what does developing that mindset actually mean? First, deconstruction and education. We need to learn what came before us: Marxists, anarchists, socialists, anti-colonial movements, what worked, what failed, why the Paris Commune collapsed, why Allende was crushed, why Rojava has survived as long as it has. And we need to unlearn capitalist indoctrination, especially the idea that hierarchy is inevitable. Emma Goldman asked a dangerous question for her time. What would society look like without coercive authority? The Zapatistas ask it today. Rojava is attempting to answer it in real time. What kind of democracy do we actually want? Representative systems captured by capital, or direct participatory models rooted in community control? And we need to interrogate class, not as an identity, but as a power relationship. Because here's the part people don't want to hear. Our entire society has been subjected to a coordinated psychological operation by the ruling class. We have documented proof of it. The Cambridge Analytica scandal of 2018 pulled the curtain back on something many of us already suspected, that our political divisions were not only organic, but actively engineered and exploited. Cambridge Analytica harvested the data of tens of millions of Americans without consent and used psychographic profiling to target people with hyper-specific political messaging designed not to persuade, but to polarize. Internal documents and whistleblower testimony show that their goal wasn't building consensus or even winning hearts and minds. It was amplifying fear, resentment, and identity-based grievance. Black voters were targeted with messaging emphasizing voter suppression, disillusionment, and distrust in political participation. White working-class voters were flooded with content stoking racial resentment, immigration panic, and cultural threat narratives. Liberals were fed moral outrage. Conservatives were fed existential dread. This wasn't accidental. It was intentional fragmentation. And here's the key point. None of that messaging challenged corporate power, wealth concentration, or imperialism. It never asked who owns the economy or who benefits from endless war. It redirected anger horizontally, never vertically. That's how modern class warfare works. As long as we're fighting each other along racial, cultural, and partisan lines, we are not fighting the people extracting wealth from all of us. So when we look around and see a nation split into hostile political tribes, unable to even speak to one another, that didn't just happen. It was tested, refined, and deployed using the same techniques once reserved for foreign psy-ops, now turned inward on the American population. And the most dangerous part is this. The left and the right each think they're resisting manipulation, while both are still operating inside narratives engineered by people with far more money and power than either side. This isn't conspiracy, it's history. Inevitably, when wealth inequality reaches extreme levels, elites close ranks and pit the lower classes against one another. Race, culture, religion, party affiliation, anything but class. James Madison literally warned that democracy had to be constrained to protect the, quote, minority of the opulent. And that's the system we've inherited. And this kind of manipulation doesn't stop with social media or electoral politics. It extends into the institutions that shape how we think, how we interpret the world, and even how the left understands itself. In recent years, philosopher and cultural critic Gabriel Rockhill has done important work exposing how intelligence agencies, particularly the CIA, have historically intervened in academic and cultural life. Drawing on declassified documents and archival research, Rockhill shows that during the Cold War, U.S. intelligence didn't just spy on foreign governments. It actively studied, funded, and shaped intellectual movements. One of the clearest examples is the CIA's involvement in cultural and academic networks through front organizations, foundations, journals, conferences, and exchange programs. Intelligence agencies understood something crucial. Ideas matter. Theory matters. Culture matters. And if you can shape the terrain of intellectual debate, you don't have to ban radical ideas outright. You can redirect them, soften them, fragment them, and render them politically harmless. Rockhill argues that this is how much of what we now call, quote, Western Marxism and academic leftism was channeled away from material class struggle and revolutionary politics and toward abstraction, individualism, and endless internal critique. Not because these ideas were fake or useless, but because they were compatible with imperial interests, they posed no serious threat to capital, empire, or state power. This wasn't about suppressing dissent so much as managing it. And that matters because it helps explain why so much contemporary left discourse is trapped in academic language, moral posturing, and symbolic battles that never meaningfully confront ownership, production, or imperial power. Why class analysis is treated as optional. Why collective struggle is replaced with personal branding and purity tests. So when people hear critiques of identity-driven fragmentation, or PMC ideology and dismiss them as reactionary or conspiratorial, they're missing the point. This is documented history. Power has always sought to shape not just politics, but the limits of acceptable thought. Taken together with things like Cambridge Analytica, it paints a clear picture. The ruling class doesn't just rely on brute force or censorship. It relies on narrative management, dividing populations, redirecting anger, and ensuring that even resistance movements remain safely contained within frameworks that never threaten the foundations of the system itself. The left-right culture war isn't organic. It's engineered. And now we have two political cults, each convinced the other is the primary enemy, while both ultimately serve the same ruling class. Which is why, and I know this makes people uncomfortable, alignment cannot be based purely on left or right identity. We should be aligning with anyone not captured by these cults against the ruling class. Political differences can be hashed out on the other side. Yes, systemic racism exists. Yes, patriarchies exist. Yes, inequality is real. But telling working class white people they are inherently racist monsters is not radical. It's PMC moral theater that benefits no one but the elites. Frantz Fanon warned explicitly about this. That elite-managed identity politics would fracture revolutionary potential and redirect anger away from material power. Which brings us to the hardest question of all, commitment. Revolutions aren't aesthetic. They are disruptive, uncomfortable, risky. So what are we actually willing to sacrifice? To the PMC class especially, whose side are you on? Are you willing to downscale your lifestyle, to share resources, to quit a job that directly props up exploitation, to pool wealth instead of hoarding it? Ingalls didn't just write theory, he funded movements. The Black Panthers didn't just speak, they built parallel systems. Those with means need to help build infrastructure, period. There's another group we need to talk about, and that's the progressive media class that rode the Bernie wave into real money and real influence, and is now getting even richer performing outrage about Trump and fascism. Day after day, they scream into microphones about how dangerous this moment is. They tell their audiences democracy is on the brink, authoritarianism is here, that people need to wake up. And then that's it. Another episode, another ad read, another merch drop. If you genuinely believe we're facing an existential threat, then talking is not enough. Awareness is not enough. Content is not resistance. These people have platforms, money, and reach. They could be funding legal defense for protesters. They could be buying and distributing gas masks, respirators, goggles, helmets, first aid kits. They could be helping build bail funds, mutual aid networks, secure communication infrastructure. They could be materially supporting the people whose bodies are actually absorbing the violence of the state. Instead, too much of what we see is political theater. Outrage monetized, fear turned into clicks, resistance reduced to vibes. It's the same logic as liberal electoralism. Outsource risk downward while comfort and profit flow upward. If you make your living telling people how dire things are, then you have a responsibility to put skin in the game. Revolution isn't a podcast genre. It's not a brand. It's not content. The question isn't whether these media figures are sincere. The question is whether they're willing to convert money, platforms, and comfort into material support, or whether they're just another professional class managing dissent while others pay the real cost. And content creators, especially those with large platforms, need to stop acting like individual brands and start thinking like a collective. Imagine a media union, a cooperative, profit sharing, coordinated amplification of smaller creators, even strategic blackouts or strikes. If major platforms went dark for a week in solidarity, that would be felt. I don't know if it's the perfect idea or if this is even a thing. That's not the point. The point is that individualistic solutions will never get us back to human values of cooperation, shared struggle, and collective survival. We are living through the decline of an empire. History selects participants whether they want to be selected or not. The question isn't whether change is coming. The question is, what role will you play in it? Because revolutionary moments don't wait for permission. They ask what you're willing to risk and who you're willing to stand with when the old world is dying and the new one hasn't fully been born. The choice is already in front of us. Okay, well, that's it. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk, everyone. I feel much better now. I hope what I've said gives you all something to think about. Also, it's worth stating that if any of the names I mentioned didn't ring a bell, then that's how you know you've been deprived of a proper education on leftist thinkers. It's intentional. Let me close by directing listeners to channels that actually understand the gravity of what we're facing. I encourage everyone to tune into them and spread the word about them. I don't know if they are aware of one another, but it would be cool to see what a collaboration between the two could do to spread a revolutionary message. These channels are Colonial Outcasts and Revolutionary Change. I will link to their channels in the show notes. I should also note that Colonial Outcasts, in partnership with the Black Panther Party, has a step-by-step plan they've drawn up. It's called the Four Winds Approach to Revolutionary Change. It's good work. Please go check it out. As for our tiny channel, that's it for me today. Hopefully John will be back with me soon. Until then, please go do all the things. Like, share, subscribe. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Substack, Reddit, and Blue Sky by searching for @WastePeoplePod. Till next time. See ya.